afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. I'm Karen Tokars, a longtime member of the law school faculty. Would you shut that for us back there? That'd be terrific. Yeah. Thank you, sir. A longtime member of the faculty here, the director of the Negotiation and Dispute Resolution Program, and the coordinator for the Public Interest Law and Policy Speaker Series. First, I want to say thanks much to our law school admin, PR, and tech support for this and all the events and speaker series events that they do for us. We couldn't do these events without them. Second, I want to say thanks to today's co-sponsor, Templeton Religion Trust. And third, I might add, particularly relevant for today, a thank you to the University Library, which you may or may not know, provides free subscriptions to the New York Times to all university students. Just contact Olin Library, but they don't give it to faculty. Today's event is the second presentation in this year's Public Interest Law and Policy Speaker Series. This is the 27th year for the speaker series here at the law school. The formal title of this series is Access to Justice Series. Note, if you would, that we have another upcoming event next week, our annual Constitution Day SCOTUS Review Preview, which features Professors Appleton, McGarry, Epps, and Katz this year on what is always insightful and illuminating. It's next Wednesday, September 17th at noon, back here in the courtroom. So each year, as you may know, this series, and this is why it was begun and has continued, brings to the law school and the university and the community prominent public interest advocates, authors, lawyers, academics, social scientists, and government officials to challenge us, as will happen today, to think hard about cutting-edge issues that are of importance to law and justice in our community, in the country, and in the world, like today's presenter, David French, who is a respected, very respected, and increasingly publishing political columnist for the New York Times and a former attorney who you're going to hear more about from Professor John Inazu, who some of you know. He is our WashU Sally Danforth Professor of Law and Religion and a nationally recognized expert in First Amendment law of speech, assembly, and religion. Please join me in welcoming them for what promises to be a great discussion. Thank you both.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks to all of you for being here on a Friday afternoon. We'll go, usually in the law school, we're pretty rigid about the 12:50 stop, but today I'm told we can go to 12:55, so we'll have some time at the end for questions, and then we'll cut it at 12:55 because David needs to run to the airport. When we were building this event and months ago, as we were needing to start to advertise, and I kept getting questions, well, what's the title and the topic, and so I said, well, we're talking basically about the First Amendment, but let's leave it vague because we don't know what's going to happen between 4 months ago and today, and that seems to have been the right strategy. And so I don't think we can do anything other than begin with the last couple of days and try to situate and contextualize this conversation from there. And then because we're sitting in a university, not unrelated to the last few days, but I also want to talk about the current state of higher ed, the vice president's claim that universities are the enemy, how all of this relates to our ability to dialogue. And then I'd love to get into, before we get to some of your questions, also, what's the role of something like this in the format of this versus usually better discussions that unfold in classrooms when people have read texts together and things like that? And how do we balance the role of the university to have public events and then also to educate, which was part of the theme of the conference that we just both finished here. So, David, get us started with where we are in the last couple of days and how you're thinking about the state of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you all, but I have spent basically the last 3 days sick to my stomach for many reasons. Principally, we just saw a young man shot to death, husband, father of 2 young kids, in front of thousands of college students, when he was doing exactly what we ask people to do on college campuses, which is talk, engage. Now, I know a lot of people had problems. Charlie Kirk and I had a lot of disagreements with each other. But I often hesitate to even bring that up in this kind of context, because when you measure the gravity of the harm that has been inflicted, a man's life was taken, a wife was widowed, kids have lost their father, with the comments and statements that he made that I disagreed with, the gravity of the life is so much greater. And so I'm sick to my stomach because of the loss, but I'm also sick to my stomach because of where it happened, on a college campus, in the middle of conversation and dialogue. So in a very real way, that assassin's bullet wasn't just aimed at the human being Charlie Kirk, a man created in the image of God, whose life is precious beyond words. It was also aimed at the public square. It was aimed at our ability to have the necessary conversations in a deeply divided country. And so that's what we're dealing with. We're not just dealing with an attack on a human being, we're dealing with an attack on, in many ways, our very system. And this is inherent in political assassinations. This is inherent when a man went to the home of the Minnesota Speaker of the House and gunned her down and her husband in her own home. That wasn't just an attack on two human beings, well, actually four, because he attacked two other people later. It wasn't just an attack on two human beings. It was an attack on our very system. It was an attack on the system of government that we have built to try to keep this ridiculously large, ridiculously diverse country together. So, and then the final thing is that I'm sick to my stomach at is a lot of the reaction that I see online, which the really negative reactions run in two directions. One is the people who are actually celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. Horrific. That's a vicious, evil thing to do. And then there are the people who are saying that the left killed Charlie Kirk. The left killed him. The left tried to kill President Trump. The left did this. The left did this. It is time to go to war on the left. And so this is taking a horrific act and trying, and in essence, it's using Charlie Kirk as a symbol to rally people to greater levels of extremism, to greater levels of hatred and animosity. So that's three big fronts where right now it is putting us in a position where I am very concerned about the short to medium term future of this country.
You know, and as we've been talking over the last couple of days about this, and the ability to radicalize, particularly online, and we're not talking about small numbers of people, and then it only takes one or two people among that large demographic to cause massive disruption, as we've seen. And then in the background still, we've got the rhetoric reaching a boiling point in all directions. So we were talking before this conference, before the last couple of days, Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt gave a very controversial speech that added to the boiling point here. And it's not like that just goes away, right? That's all out there too. And in the background, it's building and building. So can you talk about the background discourse, conversation, all of that?
Yeah, you know, there are a lot of cross currents ideologically in the background, a lot that are contributing to the intensity of the moment. So when I'm going to talk about Senator Schmidt and NatCon, I'm not ever saying that this is the thing that is driving our polarization. It is a thing that is driving our polarization and division. And so Senator Schmidt got up at National Conservatism Conference this year, and he made an argument against the notion that America is a creedal nation. Now, if you're not steeped in the divisions on the American right, this might seem like a kind of a weird thing to give a speech about. Is America a creedal nation or is it not? But you have a huge divide on the American right between what you might call what you would call Reagan conservatives, who are more in the line of classical liberals, and the new right, which is very much like the older American right, but what we can now call a new right, which is much more like the European right. In other words, it is not a movement centered around ideas of limited government and individual liberty. It is much more centered around ideas of national pride, national authority. It is much more centered around the concepts of blood and soil. that a nation is its people and its place. So why does this matter? Why does this matter? Because it really goes to the heart of what is this country? What is this place? Because this place is unlike, we often talk about American exceptionalism, and a lot of people who kind of have a rah-rah patriotic view say American exceptionalism means we're number one, like we're number one, USA, USA. And I'm very happy to chant USA, especially at the Olympics. I strongly recommend Court of Gold on Netflix about the US Olympic basketball team. Awesome. But so there's this American exceptionalism that's USA, we're number one. But there's, I think, a truer American exceptionalism that is we're different. We're different. We're a continent-sized, multi-ethnic, multi-faith democracy. That is not the norm in world history. So how does this thing hang together? That is a critical question. And if you go back and you look at the founders understood. Now it's very easy to say now that America was founded by, that founding of America was not very diverse, that it was almost entirely property-owning white males of Protestant Christian heritage who were the founders, and that feels very vanilla compared to a lot of the diversity we have today. But in the context of the 18th century, America was ludicrously diverse, especially ludicrously diverse on religious lines. That if you look at the American Eastern Seaboard, from the Puritans in Massachusetts to the refugees from the Puritans in Rhode Island, to the Dutch Reformed Genesis of New York, to the Quakers in Pennsylvania, not quite sure who lived in Maryland, but I think it was Catholics. Then you go down to Anglicans in Virginia, then down in Georgia, criminals, where they're still there. I'm sorry, by 18th century standards, that's so diverse, nobody knew how to keep that thing together, because they were about 100 years removed from the wars of religion, where all those different groups fought each other in genocidal wars. And so we constructed a system, and if you go back and you read the founders, they will say this again and again and again. For all of their flaws, this is something that they got right. That this place, these principles, the principles of all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, are universal. It is not all Americans are created equal and endowed by their, it's all people are created equal, okay? And so that has enormous implications for how we view ourselves, how we view immigration, for example, how we view diversity. And there's a lot of arguments that are made that, wait a minute, America's founding was really for Christians, for Protestant Christians. But you can go back and you can read Jefferson and you can read Madison. Jefferson, author of the Declaration, Madison, author of the Bill of Rights. So these guys, their opinion matters a little bit on what the founding is. And you'll see very clearly that they have said this is a place for people of all faiths. Madison even goes to the extent to say that it is a place for people of all places and all faiths and all nations. In his remonstrances against religious assessments, he says, all nations, all faiths can come here, can receive asylum here, and their immigration to our country adds to the luster of our nation. And so the very idea that America as a creedal country that is embracing universal human rights is fundamental to our founding. Now, it was observed in the breach. We had slavery. After slavery, you had Jim Crow. Women didn't get a right to vote to the 19th Amendment, but it pointed us in a particular direction. And the counter to that is what Senator Schmidt said, J.D. Vance said, that no, America is much more a place and a particular people. And if that is the case, then it transforms the way we view immigrants, for example. It transforms the way we view faith and religious diversity in this country. And so, and he says you could take the Constitution of the United States and put it in Kazakhstan, and you would not make Kazakhstan like America. And he said that, and it's very interesting because it was very distinct from what Ronald Reagan said in his very last address. He said, and you can go to France and you not become a Frenchman. You can move to Germany and not become a German. You can move to Turkey and not become Turkish. But a French, a German, or a Turk can come to America and become American. And it was a beautiful statement of American inclusion and universal American ideals. And That is one of the definitional questions we are facing now. Do we continue to adhere to the creed, what Lincoln called a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal? Or are we a place and a people that views the creeds as a threat if they threaten the primacy of the place and the people? That was a really long answer to your question, but I wrote a 2,000-word essay on it that got shelved because of the awful assassination, rightfully got shelved because we had to talk about other stuff, so I just inflicted it on you.
So, I knew you'd have something to say about that. David, you and I have known each other a long time. We've been in a number of rooms, this is sticking to the religion theme, a number of rooms where other people in the room have said, religious liberty is under siege. We're about to lose our religious freedom. And you and I are usually making eye contact, wondering what is going on here. And so could you tell us a bit about your sense of the state of religious freedom from a First Amendment perspective as a country where we are today?
I think the best way to describe the state of religious liberty under the law is to just share this salient fact. There's not been a single significant religious liberty loss at the Supreme Court in 15 years. It's been 15 years, since 2010, I believe, when CLS v. Martinez was decided. And so in 15 years, there's been an unbroken run of very significant victories for religious freedom. How significant? I will tell you this. In 2006, I was working for a religious liberty legal organization, and we sat down and we were planning our litigation initiatives and all the objectives we were trying to accomplish, including making sure there was equal access for people of faith in campus facilities, equal access to student activity funding, to make sure that there was equal access in any school voucher program for religious institutions, to protect the autonomy and the hiring of religious institutions to use faith-based principles to hire ministry. I mean, we're just going through the list. We have accomplished every one of those and then some. Every one of the major goals we listed in 2006 has been accomplished and more. And yet, still to this day, you will have people say American religious liberty is under siege. It's one election from extinction. It's 6 minutes to midnight. And I'm glad you brought that up because it is quite indicative, I think, of the way in which we conduct our political debate right now. Everything is quasi-apocalyptic and sometimes with no foundation. Similarly, in the First Amendment free speech context, this has been one of the friendliest courts to First Amendment free speech claims in generations. I mean, this is a very friendly court to the First Amendment. And so we do live in a world where many of our liberties are more secure than they've been, legally more secure than they've been in a very long time. But you would never know it from the rhetoric. You would never know it. And so, but that doesn't mean that there aren't threats. There are always threats to liberty. There are always individual governments that are stepping too far. There are always cultural currents against liberty. We've been through various waves of what is called cancel culture from the left, from the right. So there are always threats to liberty, always, because protecting the rights of people we disagree with kind of cuts counter to our human nature, and we're always trying to figure out ways not to do that. But from a legal standpoint, our liberty is more secure than it's been, and understanding that can maybe help people chill out a tiny bit.
Before your current gig at the New York Times, one of your roles was directing the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE, and one of the things you did was sue universities a lot. So you're very familiar with the First Amendment and the university. And this is a question, a genuine puzzle I want to ask of you. Washington University, as a private institution, is not subject to the First Amendment, but I often hear around here where we aspire to the First Amendment, or we share a First Amendment norm. And I am not unfamiliar with these topics, but I'm always puzzled by what that means. Either you're on board with the First Amendment or you divert from it. And there are legitimate reasons to divert from it as a private institution, but I would want to then know what those are and why. So help me out and help out the privates of the world to figure out what it means to say we are not formally subject to the First Amendment, but we care about First Amendment values, and how do we fill that in?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on this. I like directionally the statement that says we are guided by First Amendment norms. I like that directionally. The problem is the devil's always in the details. There's this, have y'all seen the, just I hate to bring up like obscure classic cinema, but have you seen Ricky Bobby, Talladega Nights? Okay, great American film. And there's this point where he goes, "With all due respect," and then just lacerates his boss. And he's like, "Why did you say that, Ricky Bobby?" And he goes, "Well, I said with all due respect." So you learn, like when you grow up in the South, if you hear the phrase, "with all due respect," pay no attention to the "with all due respect." It's only what follows after is what they really mean. The same thing when it comes to free speech. When you ever hear free speech, but, pay close attention to everything that follows the but, because that's the real philosophy of free speech. And so I'm frequently around private school administrators who say we're guided by First Amendment norms, comma, but, ... which means most of the time they're not actually guided by First Amendment norms. So my general view is that I do think that private schools should be guided by First Amendment doctrine, not First Amendment norms, okay? And why would I say that, even though they have the right not to? There is a lot of accumulated cultural wisdom in these First Amendment doctrines. These are disputes that have played out for decades across American life on some of the most hot-button emotional issues that you can imagine, with an understanding that the right to free speech has never been considered absolute, that there are limits to it. And those have been hashed out in hundreds and thousands of cases for decades. And to sort of get into a room, a committee meeting of university officials and sort of say, okay, well, that's all nice what you've done, but the 8 smart people here, we can figure out the ultimate free speech environment. No, you can't. You can't do it. Universities have been trying to do it for years and years and years to create some sort of speech and discussion utopia where you get all of the benefits of exposure to contrary ideas and none of the negative aspects. You can't do it. So my general view would be a private institution should adopt First Amendment doctrine. And if a private institution decides not to, for whatever reason, and I've heard a lot of people will say, well, religious institutions, they often have good reason not to. I used to be all on board with that, John. I'm more skeptical of it. I've been around enough religious institutions that just sort of say, well, we're religious. We're about inculcating ideas. And that turns really authoritarian really fast time and time again. So my general view would be a private university should adopt First Amendment doctrine. And if it is going to depart from First Amendment doctrine, it shouldn't do so in vague words. It should do so in very specific policy guidance that you can rely on. And it's that ambiguity that is wrecking universities, because into that ambiguity leaks all kinds of bias, leaks all kinds of unfairness, to where people will be walking around major research universities and have tales of hypocrisy to tell about administrators and faculty members who utilize that freedom that they actually do have, often in ways that are extremely punitive, unjust, and deeply hypocritical and biased. And it's one of the reasons why public regard for universities is pretty low. It's a reason why, if the Trump administration aims at both barrels at Columbia and Harvard and other institutions, you don't see 1 million people in the streets waving signs that say hands off Harvard, right? Because they don't like it so much, for a lot of good reasons. And so that does not justify unconstitutional actions against it by the administration, but into all of that free speech ambiguity, administrators time and time again have poured in bias and unfairness. And we're living with those consequences now.
Let's move from law to culture on a university campus. John Stuart Mill famously said, it's not so much the laws of men that constrain opinion, but it's the opinions of other people that cause you to be silent and not speak up. And so this plays into a very common discussion and ongoing debate around college campuses. Do students feel like they can speak? Do they feel pressured in or out of class not to speak? What's the vibe, as my kids would say? I'll say in the summer of 2020 and the fall of 20, as COVID was ramping up, we were all distanced, we'd had the murder of George Floyd, rhetoric was at a high. It was for me a low point at this place and in higher ed, and I did feel very stifled on multiple fronts from being able to communicate. I felt that students I talked to couldn't speak honestly. 5 years later, my day-to-day experience is the kids are okay, and we're doing this thing pretty well, right? I mean, I don't mean kid, it was a joke, right? I mean, you all are brilliant.
You're all adults.
You're all, well, yeah, you are, almost all of you are legally adults, which is true. And we're doing this thing, especially in my experience in the classroom, called education, and we're developing this very fragile but important trust with each other as students and teachers, and with my colleagues and across this campus. And yes, there are things that I would love to see different, and there are different hires and other things that I would like to see at this place and others. But I don't get the sense that the university is collapsing in the same way that I'm hearing from some of the public rhetoric, from what I'm reading, from what the federal government is saying about places like this one. And so give me your sense of the culture of these institutions, and what is legitimately a problem, what's being painted as a problem that's not, and maybe aspirationally where you'd like to see things go.
I'm so glad you asked that, because one of the things that we can no longer talk about is the university as a singular cultural entity in the United States. It's just not. The schools now are very different from each other, and I think more different from each other than when I started being involved in higher ed free speech issues 30 plus years ago. It's more different than it was, so that when I go and I speak at college campuses, they're radically different from each other, not just in their policies and their sort of ideological outlook, but in their campus culture. So where I teach, a small Christian college in Nashville, Tennessee, it's a very politically diverse and very peaceful. Both of those things are true at once. It's probably evenly divided, 50-50 Republican and Democrat. But the peacefulness of it is not all good, because they don't talk about politics with each other. They just don't. And I teach a class on religious freedom, and I know my students well enough. I've had some of them for 2 and 3 years in different classes. I know where they stand politically. I know where they are. I know that my class is about 50-50 red-blue. And they have had, in basically the same group of students over 2 semesters, I don't recall a single political argument between them in class. Not one. And I asked the question, I was finally like, guys, I don't want to do the back in my day thing, but I'm going to do it. Back in my day, we went at it in class. Like, we went at it, hammer and tongs, we fought it out. But then we were friends afterwards. We went at it. And a student raised her hand, and she said, see, that's the difference. That's the difference. We want to stay friends. And we can't stay friends anymore when there's a disagreement. And what she didn't realize is she had echoed something that had been told to me about 10 years before by a pastor who died a couple of years ago named Tim Keller. Many people might know who that is. He was a very famous evangelical pastor. And he told me in a meeting, this was 10 plus years ago, David, I'm noticing a big change in my congregation. The younger people in the congregation used to be able to disagree about important things and remain friends, and now they can't. They're having trouble remaining friends if they disagree about important things. And so I think that's one thing that's happening on some campuses, is that people just want to preserve relationships, so that's bringing a kind of false peace, if that makes sense. But then there are other campuses that have genuine debate and dialogue. Like I'll talk about one near my home in Tennessee. Vanderbilt University has taken a great effort to advance civility and free speech side by side, and has created a very, very and robustly healthy debating culture. But then I can go to another place, and it's completely different from that. In other places, there has been so much contention on campus that we've seen incidents of anti-Semitic harassment across the length and breadth of campus. We've seen in some campuses violence directed at pro-Palestinian protesters by public officials. We've seen at other campuses crackdowns. And so we can't say anymore, the university is like ... It has to be which university, what is happening there. But just because a lot of the true dysfunction is isolated in only a few universities doesn't mean it isn't very consequential, because a lot of that dysfunction is happening in some of the institutions that are most likely to be training America's future political and governmental leaders. And one of the things that's distressing to me is they are not getting an education in civil discourse. They are getting an education in direct action and aggressive confrontation. And that is, and look, I'm the last person, as a free speech attorney, I'm the last human being alive who's going to say, don't be an activist, okay? Gosh, if people took that advice to not be an activist, I'd never have had legal work. And I'll tell you, being a free speech attorney is lucrative. No. There's no free speech Lamborghini in my driveway. So I'm not going to say don't be an activist, but one of the focuses of a focus of a student should be curiosity. This is a time when you actually don't know everything. This is a time when you should be a sponge. You're absorbing knowledge, you're absorbing information, but instead, a lot of times we're turning into a moment when you need to be not a sponge, but a fire hose, and you're spewing out your opinions and your ideas. And look, I'm going to protect that right, but consider curiosity as a first option.
I want to go to audience questions in just a minute. I think we have microphones for that, but one more question for you, David, before we do. You just mentioned Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt and WashU have sort of famously said, we are going to pursue institutional neutrality as our position. I have my own doubts about that normative position, but I'd be curious about what your general take on institutional neutrality is.
So my general take is you don't have to do it, but I think it's prudent. And if you're not going to be institutionally neutral, be pretty clear and upfront where your perspective is. So for example, again, if you're teaching at a Christian or you're a part of a explicitly evangelical Christian or say Catholic institution or yeshiva or something like that, that means that there's not going to be institutional neutrality on, say, the question of Jesus, like the institution's going to be pro. I mean, not obviously not, a Jewish institution, but like an evangelical or Catholic. So institutional neutrality is going to be inevitably contextual, but I think in general it is quite prudent. And the reason why I say that is that I'm in agreement with the Calvin statement from the University of Chicago, that in essence the core of the university is to provide a platform, an arena for the discussion of ideas. It is not a core purpose of the university as the university to be the participant in the debate. It provides for the debate. It's not a participant. Now why? Why would that be the case? And one of the reasons is that when the institution weighs in officially, it often tells to a lot of the people who are at the institution who don't agree with the institution that I am not truly a member of this community, that I am an outsider in this community. Also, the pressure to weigh in creates a situation where a lot of times campuses are being called to weigh in on things where A, their opinion is completely irrelevant, and B, it's well outside their areas and arenas of expertise. And C, it creates a constant pressure for more. So for example, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Harvard, I believe they flew the Ukrainian flag in Harvard Yard. The university stood with Ukraine, and it was something that was a very easy decision to make on that campus. There was not a lot of people at Harvard who are going, yay, Russian invasion. Very nominal presence at that point of view. So after October 7th, some Jewish students said, fly the Israeli flag. They were attacked. Israel was attacked. People were brutally massacred. But then the university, that puts the university, okay, is this exactly like that? If it's not, why not? Are we going to parse that in the immediate aftermath of a massacre? What are we doing? And so it creates an enormous amount of contention. And then the other thing is, to what end? So I was at a conference of college presidents a few years ago, and the topic of the last session was, when should we weigh in on public events? And I was the last speaker, and I said, have you considered not? And here's the reason. I walked through, where's the core competency here? Where is the, what's the treatment and what messages are you sending to people you disagree with? And also, how much does this matter? I was a student, I graduated in 1991, and in 1991, the Gulf War happened. And in 90 and 91, there was a lot of American debate over whether we should defend Kuwait Should we reinvade Kuwait, take it over from Saddam Hussein? Should we go ahead and topple Saddam? I mean, this was a big, huge international issue. I have no clue what my university chancellor thought about it. No clue at all. Don't care. Don't care. I know for a fact Harold Hazlitt, as much as I love the man, had not studied the geopolitics of military intervention in the Middle East, but he was a phenomenal New Testament scholar. And so, as a general matter, man, I've been giving really long answers to your questions. I'm so sorry. As a general answer, a qualified pro.
Okay, great. Questions from you all. We've got two sides.
Hi, my name is Beth Bowden. I work in the Chancellor's office as his communications director.
Fine, okay.
I'm interested in your answers, but the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression came out with their most recent yearly report on free speech atmosphere, and they give a report card. I didn't dig into it yet, but one of the big headlines from that is that a third of students surveyed indicated that they felt violence was sometimes okay to prevent a controversial speaker from speaking controversial ideas on their campus. And that just blew me away. So we have this whole country that thinks young people are being brainwashed by these Marxist professors. How much does it kind of go in the other direction? How much of what happens on a college campus, how much are students chilling the speech of the professors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so one thing that FIRE has also done is it has created a Scholars Under Fire database of attempts to fire or punish professors for their speech. And what they found is the number of professors who faced job action because of their speech is greater in recent years than it was in the McCarthy era. And what they also found is in an awful lot of those pressures for firings, for terminations, et cetera, weren't coming necessarily from alumni. They weren't coming from the dean of students. They weren't coming from the university president. They were coming from the students. And the students were absolutely committed to trying to silence people who were engaging in expression that would be either absolutely constitutionally protected on a public university or in a private university within traditional bounds of academic freedom. And it connects with that point that you're making, this 30+% who believe that violence is justified to suppress speech on some occasions. And I think that this is the consequence of two very related trends. So one of the trends is is increasing hatred in American life. If somebody asks me what is the #1 threat to the United States of America, I'll tell you instantly it's hatred. And it's hatred of each other. The hatred we have for each other. So partisans in this country despise each other. They despise each other. You ask and this is not a new thing. In 2014, so this is before the Trump era, Pew Research Center asked Americans, Republicans, what do you think of Democrats? Democrats, what do you think of Republicans? And this is 2014, 82% of Republicans said they either strongly dislike or somewhat dislike Democrats. Democrats were more tolerant, as befitting their reputation as a party. Only 78% of Democrats either strongly disliked or somewhat disliked Republicans. And it's only gotten worse since then. So here's a true statement, guys. If you're an aspiring civil libertarian, welcome to the tribe of like 9. If you're an aspiring civil libertarian, what you're going to know is, and learn very quickly, is people do not love to defend the liberty of people they hate. And one of the quickest ways to destroy liberty is to foster hatred. So one, we live in an atmosphere of absolute hatred. And number two, we also live in an atmosphere that for a lot of complicated reasons, a lot of students have been taught that justice, in particular racial justice or social justice, and free speech are at odds with each other. That free speech and diversity are somehow in conflict with each other, rather than the reality is that free speech has enabled justice and social change. Almost, as Frederick Douglass said in 1860 in his plea for free speech in Boston, that free speech is the great moral renovator of society and government. And so if you are a justice-minded individual, then free speech should be one of your causes, if for no other reason than is a great means to your end. I think you should support free speech as its own principle and not as a means to an end. But it is also a means to an end of justice, and has been throughout American history. As I spoke to the Reverend, and forgive me those who were here last night, I'm repeating something I said last night. Reverend Walter Fauntroy, an early leader in the civil rights movement, one of the architects of the congressional and founders of the Congressional Black Caucus, I asked him to help explain why there was so much enormous legal change between 1954 and Brown v. Board and 1965, the Voting Rights Act, after hundreds of years of legally sanctioned bigotry and violence in this country. And he said two things: Almighty God and the First Amendment. He said the First Amendment gave us the right to speak, and Almighty God softened men's hearts. Representative Lewis, lion of the civil rights movement near the end of his life, said the civil rights movement without the First Amendment would be like a bird without wings. So I think a big part of our challenge is, number one, turning down the temperature so that we don't hate each other. And number two, civic education so that people learn that free speech and justice are not at odds with each other.
Hey, I'm John from teaching the clinical program here. So I had a question, I guess, for you as a member of the media and a participant in that market. So one of the things I've been trying to think about is I really value what we do here because we have face-to-face interactions that allow us to see people beyond those labels, right? Like I think one of the things that softens the I hate that tribe is that person becomes a person. It seems to me we have increasingly fewer venues for that, right? And right, no town halls in New England or coffee houses, and even church is a show and for a lot of people, right? So do you see, and I guess my concern about the media is that the way the market works is we have incentivized outrage, right, and opinion rather than any kind of information or exposure. So what are your thoughts on other places besides classrooms where maybe we can have where we could invest in infrastructure to have face-to-face interactions, or is that just?
You raise a tremendously important point. Let me share a couple of statistics with you. One is that the people who consume the most political media in the United States are the most wrong about their political opponents. That sounds weird. Like you would think, you know, that person in your life, and you may be that person in your life. If you're here at a First Amendment nerd talk, okay, you might be that person who's the most politically engaged friend, but many of you that you have friends that they're the most politically engaged, and we typically turn to those people in times of like before elections. And I don't know if you've ever had this happen. If you're like one of those political nerds, somebody says, "Hey Jane, tell me how to vote," you know, or "Brian, tell me who to vote for," right? But what we found is that the people who are most following politics most closely are most wrong about their political opponents, and they're most wrong in a very particular way. They believe their opponents are more extreme than they really are. Why? Because if it bleeds, it leads. If you have a hunger, if you're a partisan person on the right or the left, you have a hunger for news or information that validates your priors, and nothing validates your priors more than corruption, scandal, and violence on the other side. And so this is how you get to a point where you will have, after this horrible, horrible murder, a person on the right will say, "You tried to kill our president. You killed Charlie Kirk. You burned American cities in 2020. And they're talking to the whole left. "You did this. We're at war with you." And then you'll see people on the left respond, "You stormed the Capitol. Right-wing mass murders have shot up synagogues, shopping centers. You threatened election workers. You threatened school board members. You tried to kidnap the governor of Michigan." And so you get this back and forth war. And then the other statistic is the people who are most correct about their political opponents are people who pay no attention to the media at all. Why then are they so correct? They get their information about their political opponents from these antiquated things called friendships. And so it is absolutely true that two things are happening at once right now in America. We are spending less time in person with each other, and we have many fewer friendships than we used to have. And that is destabilizing us. It's embittering us, and it's destabilizing us. And so the question is, where else can we go aside from classrooms like this or churches The answer is a diminishing number of places. That I do feel as if one of the ways past this terrible, difficult national moment is a revival of civic associations. Robert Putnam, 25 years ago, wrote a book called Bowling Alone that might be the most prescient, important book of the last 25 years. And he was talking about declining Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, bowling leagues, et cetera. And what's going to get us back? Revival of those institutions. De Tocqueville, going all the way back to the early 19th century, was saying that one of the Americans' most salient characteristics is we're constantly forming associations with each other. We're constantly building institutions together, and we're losing that. We're losing that, and we need to revive it.
Hi, I'm a law student here. I am trans, and I agree with you that I don't want to hear like I'm not really talking about this institution, but like I don't want to hear my private corporation's opinion about like political moments.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to hear like if the discourse is targeting me, I want to hear that they still want me there. So how do we balance like the speech that we're expecting from our corporations?
Yeah, well, I do think it is absolutely in an institution's own interest. So what are we neutral about? What we're neutral about are issues external to the university. So neutral about the Gaza war. You're neutral about, now, the president, no individual at the university is going to be neutral about these things, but institutionally, you're neutral about external issues. What you're not neutral about is what are issues that directly impact the university, okay? And so one thing that I think universities, it is absolutely an institutional imperative for universities is to send a message that all members of this community are welcome here and their inclusion in this community, both legally and culturally, legally, culturally, and morally, is valued. And I think that is not violating institutional neutrality. I think that's just an institutional imperative. And so one of the ways in which institutions can maintain that standard is by robustly enforcing properly drawn anti-harassment laws, by robustly making the argument that we're to treat each other with decency and civility. Vanderbilt, for example, as I said, has an institutional neutrality statement. It has a very strong free speech commitment, but it also, right alongside, has a very strong civility commitment. And I think those two things have to go together. And the reason why I say that is another group of people who thought they had to go together was the founders of this country. Because they took the view that liberty without virtue was destructive, that liberty without virtue would lead to ruin. And this is what Adams said in his letter to the Massachusetts militia, that without morality, vices and like greed, ambition, avarice, etc., will cut through the cords of our Constitution the way a whale goes through a net. And so I do think that an institution that is committed to the liberty and dignity of its members advances liberty and virtue side by side. And one of the virtues is grace and compassion, and dare I say, even love for all of the members of the academic environment or academic community.
Last question from me, because we're out of time, sorry. We've got a room full of students and faculty and others, but among this audience are law students, some of whom will have their own clients in just a few months, who are going to be the future of the legal profession. And I want to hear from you. You've got a couple minutes to address some of the future lawyers of this country. So what's your advice to the lawyers?
So first, I just want to say you made a very good choice to come to law school. If you listen to the world's greatest legal podcast, Advisory Opinions, which is great because my co-host, Sarah, she's phenomenal. I'm just riding her coattails. She's tremendous. But we have an argument with each other about should you go to law school. And my argument is I'm a huge fan of going to law school, huge fan. Because it's a wonderful option, expanding choice. I've been a member of the same fantasy baseball league for 35 years. Don't laugh at me. 35 years in the same league, I only have 2 titles. That will tell you something about my baseball prowess. But Of the 15 guys in our fantasy baseball league, 3 are still in the full-time practice of law. 12 are doing really interesting other things. So it's an option expanding choice. Congratulations on making a great choice to come here. The other thing is, congratulations on joining the last functioning branch of government. And when I say that, a private lawyer, and even a private lawyer, is in many material and important ways a part of the branch of government. You are an officer of the court. And what I would tell you and what I would challenge you is to hold that line. Hold that line. Do what you can to preserve the traditions and norms of a profession that privileges evidence-based argument conducted in an environment and an atmosphere of peace and civility. That is absolutely indispensable to this country. And look, we can all find lawyers who have breached all of those values. They're out there. We know the legal environment is under strain, but I can tell you this, it is still a good profession. It is still full of good people, and you can do a lot of good in it. I have a dear friend who's a head of a Christian ministry, and he started listening to advisory opinions, as all right-thinking people should, and he then started listening to Supreme Court oral arguments. And he's not even a lawyer. Why did he do it? Why did he start listening to Supreme Court oral arguments? He said, hearing passionate advocates debate the most important issues of the day with civility and decency, relying on facts and evidence and logic, was like a balm to my soul. And I know what he means. I know what he means. And so that torch is being handed to you. That torch is being handed to you in a moment where all of our branches of government are under immense strain. Sarah's got a book about to come out called Last Branch Standing, which I love. You are joining the last branch standing. And I do think in many ways this last branch standing can be a foundation for cultural renewal as well. Because somebody's got to live the values. Somebody's got to model the values of a pluralistic democracy conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. It's your turn now.
Thank you for being here, and please join me in thanking David French.